What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about a book that I finished reading a week or two ago, A Game of Thrones from the Song of Ice and Fire series. I'm sure that you guys have heard of this series. It is a really popular television series also, and I just finished reading this book, like I said, a couple weeks ago. I was actually listening with an audiobook while reading this massive book. This is like 800 pages of just the story, and then there's a little bit of appendices and stuff in the back. And I don't want to talk about the plot of the book because I'm pretty sure everyone watching this video is already familiar with the story of this. If not from the books, then from the TV show. So I'm not so much going to be reviewing the book, but I do want to talk a little bit about something that kind of bothered me when I was reading this. Like I said, I was listening with an audiobook while reading. That's kind of how I read prose. I listen to an audiobook while I read it. Otherwise, I just wouldn't never be able to finish reading an 800-page book. So while I was listening to this audiobook and I went through the comments, it was on YouTube, and I don't remember which portion of the audiobook it was, but people were talking about the relationship between Daenerys and Drogo. Now, if you by chance have not read the book or watched the TV series, Daenerys in the book, when she first starts at the beginning of the book, she is 13 years old, and her brother basically sells her to a barbarian warlord so that the brother can become a king. He can get an army from the barbarians, and he can go back to the homelands and take over the throne that once belonged to his father. So this relationship is really gross and disgusting in the books, and I've only watched about half of season 1 of the show, and it's even worse in the TV show. So no matter how you slice it, this relationship is either statutory rape or full-on rape. In the books, Dany is 13 when she first has sex with Khal Drogo, and to be fair, I guess, they do slice it so that she doesn't want to have sex with this guy, but then by the time it actually happens, she has changed her mind, and it is consensual. It's still very disturbing because it's a 13-year-old girl. We are never told how old Khal Drogo is. For all we know, he could be in his early 20s, but I kind of got the impression that he was in his 40s. At one point, they talk about how any of the Dothraki, that's what Khal Drogo is, when they're in battle, if they lose a battle, they have to chop their hair off. And they say that Khal Drogo has never had to cut his hair. So I'm assuming that he's a little older than early 20s, but no matter how you say it, it's still very disturbing and disgusting. And there were people talking about, and then in a TV show, I'll just go ahead and say this real quick. In a TV show, it's even worse because she does not change her mind. It is full-on rape. He just has sex with her, and she does not want it. It's very clear that she does not want it. Later in the season, she starts to soften on Khal Drogo, and she likes him a little bit more, but that's still very disturbing, and it's just very unpleasant. It leaves a bad taste in your mouth watching that first scene. But talking about the books, there were people saying that, oh, you wouldn't be able to write that in a book now. That wouldn't fly nowadays, and a lot has changed since then. And that kind of ruffled my feathers a little bit, because I get the feeling that people think that this book was written a lot longer ago than what it is. This book was written in the mid-90s. The 1990s were not that long ago, guys. If you look at something like the Sherlock Holmes books, Sherlock Holmes actually did cocaine in the old Sherlock Holmes books. And when I first found that out, I was kind of like, what? Really? That's crazy. Cocaine is illegal. But then when you think about it, it wasn't back in the 1880s when those books were written. It was no big thing for a character to do cocaine in a Sherlock Holmes book. So while society has changed quite a bit in the 140 years since those books were written, you can look at those and you can see how different things were back in that time period. Rape was not an okay thing that everyone was just chill with in the mid-1990s. It was still very wrong. It was still very illegal. Now, you might say, well, this is a fantasy story set thousands of years ago, and I would say, not really. This is not set in our world. This has got a fictional set of continents, fictional people, fictional races. There are dragons and warlocks, so this is not the real world. Now, George R.R. Martin, he does draw a lot of influences from real-world things. I will grant you that. And if you look at something like, say, in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, you had Jacob's 12 sons and his daughter Dinah. Dinah was raped by a prince in the land that they were living in, and then 2 of her older brothers went and killed the guy and his entire village. And a lot of people tend to think that Dinah might have been about 13 when that happened, so maybe George R.R. Martin was thinking, okay, taking that and then applying it to this book, 13 is when a lot of the people in this world tend to think that a person becomes a man or a woman. And then you look at other characters. Jon Snow is drinking wine when he's 14. You've got Sansa and Joffrey. I don't remember how old they are. Neither one of them are drinking wine, or neither one of them are 18. I'm pretty sure they're both younger than Jon Snow, and they're both drinking wine. So this is not the same set of standards that we have in the present day, where you don't drink wine until you're 21. So maybe you could say that, okay, this is set in a different time period, but it's still bothers me a lot whenever someone says you couldn't write that now. Okay, you could say this is set in a time period where people did very disgusting things that would not fly nowadays, but to say you could not write that scene nowadays, that's a little bit weird. Why is it okay to write a rape scene in the mid-90s, but it's not okay now? I don't think that it was okay then. I want to say the only reason that this flew by was because this book, while it was popular with a cult audience, it wasn't insanely popular like it is now. I think if George R.R. Martin wrote anything now, which is a fantastical idea in itself, if he wrote anything now and it had a 13-year-old girl having sex with a guy in his 40s, a lot of people would cry foul and say, no, you can't do that, because he is under a microscope, and anything and everything that he does, a lot of people are going to be paying attention, which was not the case in the mid-90s when this book came out. Now, this was not his first book. He was writing stuff back in the 70s. I know he did some stories with Starlog, short stories, so he was writing for a good long while before this book came out, but this book did not have the audience that the entire Game of Thrones franchise has now. And so I think what these people are saying, and maybe they just had trouble articulating it, and it kind of got me a little bit miffed whenever I heard this, but then I had to think about it a little bit. What they're saying is, George R.R. Martin could not write a scene like this now and get away with it. He would have to be very careful in how he would write a scene like that. But in the mid-90s, when nobody knew what Game of Thrones was and nobody knew who George R.R. Martin was, he could write something like that, and a lot fewer people would have an issue with it. I don't know if people had an issue with it when this book came out, and this is, I don't really have a good ending to this video. I just felt like I had to say something that was something that kind of just rubbed me the wrong way when people were saying like, oh, it was okay to write that in the mid-90s, it's not so okay now. And I am not justifying George R.R. Martin writing this in these books. These books have a lot of really horrible, disgusting things that happen in them, things that would not happen nowadays. So I feel like you could look at that and you could say these are not characters that we are supposed to admire. Khal Drogo is not a character that you're supposed to look up to. He's not one of the main characters. And Dany is a 13-year-old girl. You could say she doesn't know better. Her brother has been grooming her to be prostituted to the Khal for as long as she can remember. He's been wanting to use her for his own political games for her entire life. So you could say that she doesn't know any better. And I think in the TV show, I haven't gotten that far, by the time Daenerys meets Jon Snow, I think she even calls it what it is, but it's still a little too late, in my opinion. But anyway, I don't really have a good solution to this. It was just something that I thought needed to be discussed, and I'm sure other people have done a much better job of discussing that than I have. But that was something that I wanted to say about Game of Thrones. I'm probably going to be doing another Game of Thrones video in a week or so, because I do have some more stuff to say about this that's going to be a little less of a heavy topic. But anyway, I hope that I didn't bring you guys down too much with this video. I hope that you guys liked the video. If you want to see and hear me talk more about real books and not comic books all the time, let me know in the comments, because I do plan to be reading some more books with my audiobook plan. It lets me read books a little faster than I would normally, because like Dune by Frank Herbert, it took me over a year to read that book. So this is a lot better for me, and I won't necessarily always be able to find the audiobook, but that's neither here nor there. So anyway, those are some thoughts that I had about the Game of Thrones book, and kind of how things have changed a little bit, or how things haven't changed as much as people think. So anyway, I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back later this week with another video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.